everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of the podcast. Today our guest is Dr. Agnes Wainman. Agnes is a clinical psychologist with a private practice in London, Ontario, Canada. She focuses on working with burned out, overwhelmed women, new moms, and those struggling with infertility. I'm so excited about this conversation. I think it will resonate with many women because we're going to explore the 5 things that women who are successful, who are strong, who are wise, the qualities that they embody and try to live out in their daily lives. Now, these qualities are not original. Glennon Doyle Melton, who is the author of Carry On Warrior and a book to be released later this year called Love Warrior, identified these 5 habits. And so in today's conversation, because Agnes and I both focus on supporting women in our practices, we felt it would be meaningful to have a conversation about these qualities and explore how women can begin to integrate these qualities into their lives. So let's go ahead and get started with the interview. Hi, Agnes. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited.
I've been looking forward to having you as a guest for a very long time. And just as we were chatting before we actually started the official interview, talking about the qualities or the things that women who are strong and successful, what they find themselves doing. And I thought it was interesting as we were talking about that, and I was talking about some of the shifts that I'm making and things that I'm aware of, and you were talking about that also, that we could see them lining up with these 5 things.
Yeah, I love when that happens because it means we must be onto something.
We must be. So before we start, Agnes, can you share a little bit about yourself and, your practice and everything else about you for our listeners?
Sure. So my name is Agnes Wainman. I'm a registered clinical psychologist and I practice in London, Ontario, Canada. And my practice is geared primarily to working with overwhelmed, worried women. And I also have subspecialties in working with women going through reproductive challenges, also perinatal mental health, and working with women who have kind of lost themselves and are feeling burnt out and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I've had some experience with that. And I started a second business this year as well. So I also created Blissful Practice, which helps other therapists create and build their own private practice, which has been super fun. And I'm also the mom to twins who are almost 8, which just blows my mind.
Wow. You definitely have experience in the areas that you were describing. So today, Agnes, I just wanted to jump into some of these qualities that, they're not original. These were actually in Glennon Doyle Melton's book, Carry On Warrior. And she's actually, I think, releasing another book in the next few months called The Love Warrior. And she identified what she said were, qualities that she noticed in women who were very strong and were also successful. So I'm just going to list these and we'll talk about them and go from there.
Awesome.
So one of the things that Glennon mentioned was that women who are strong and successful also have really good boundaries.
I love that one so much because I think often people have boundaries as ways of creating distance with people. And I love Brené Brown's very simple definition of a boundary. It's like, this is okay with me and this is not okay with me. And those boundaries actually help us have really close and connected relationships because we know what to expect. The people we're in relationships know what to expect. We can be really clear with those boundaries and actually have better relationships versus this idea that they create distance between people. So I'm a big fan of boundaries.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I think with boundaries, I think the first thing we think of, and it's a big part, are relationships. But I also think about having boundaries between ourselves and, the choices we make as far as our activities, things we engage in. And again, as asking that question, is this okay with me? And I think as a woman, I'm guilty of going, well, it's not really okay, but, it's okay.
Mhm.
Making what's not okay, okay, saying yes to things that I'm not really 100% into, or letting things into my schedule that have no right being there, taking things on. Yeah, so I think, that boundaries piece also goes into, the way we structure our lives.
Absolutely. And I know with a lot of the women I work with, guilt is something that often comes up,
Yes.
that they're constantly feeling that they're doing something wrong. And that can be really hard because, there's things that we all accept as wrong.
Yeah.
If you murder someone, feel guilty, you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas we set kind of definitions for ourselves that, yes, saying no is wrong, not volunteering is wrong, and then we feel that guilt. So I think before we can work through healthy boundaries for ourselves, we have to kind of also tackle that guilt piece as well.
And I think, with just being nurturers and caretakers, I think it's hard to sometimes be clear on saying no and reconciling that with that means that I'm not being a good mom, or I'm not caring, or I'm not responding. I think expanding our definition that sometimes saying no can be the most loving thing you can do.
Absolutely. When you say yes to things, then what are you saying no to? If you say yes to baking, 100 cupcakes for your kids, school, what are you saying no to? Are you saying no to, you getting to work out? Or are you saying no to spending time with your partner? Are you saying no to you getting a good night's sleep?
Yeah.
So, I think we really need to really consider if we're saying yes to other people, in what ways are we saying no to ourselves?
I like that. That's a really good way to kind of approach the whole boundary thing. In addition to, am I okay with this? That can be like a follow-up question. If I say yes to this, to kind of help you work through that.
Yeah. And connected to the guilt piece, because often people will do things to not feel guilty. But then what are you trading that lack of guilt in for? All of these different perspectives.
Yeah.
Where again, we feel driven by guilt, but then we're trading it in for sometimes something even more dysfunctional.
Right. I tell my clients sometimes that, whether you say yes out of guilt, you're going to feel uncomfortable because you'll be resentful, you'll be tired, you'll have to not do the things you really want to do. Or you can feel uncomfortable because you're uncomfortable with having to say no. But either way, you're going to feel some level of discomfort. So why not feel uncomfortable with honoring what really speaks to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, often women will have a hard time, doing that for themselves. So I say, think of it as modeling for the person that you're saying no to.
I love that. That's another good way.
That maybe they struggle with saying no, and you're really just doing them a favor by saying no.
I like that. Oh my gosh, all of these suggestions, I'm going to write up like a blog post of, how to approach your boundaries. That's a good one. Another habit that Glennon identified of strong, successful women is that they show up before they're ready. And I know that I've done this. I still do this where I'm preparing, getting more research, taking more classes, and I just take forever before I actually start anything. And the truth is, I think you're never really ready whenever you're starting something new. It's just like being a mom. I don't think you're ever ready to be a mom.
No. Yeah, the human population would die out if we just waited to be ready.
Yeah.
And I love that idea of just showing up, kind of just coming as you are. And being genuine about that, because I think that there's this whole fake it till you make it, which I don't totally agree with, because I think that kind of puts on some pressure, versus kind of showing up in our lives and just being this is my first time giving this talk, or this is my first time being on a podcast, or, and just owning that.
Yeah.
And again, modeling for other people.
Yes.
That it doesn't have to be perfect, because perfectionism, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think what keeps us from showing up is that fear of being judged for not being, fill in the blank enough, whether it's smart enough, whether it's experienced enough. So kind of pushing ourselves out of that fear-based place.
Yeah. And I love how you said that when you are able to do this for yourself, you model it for others, which, you make it okay for them to show up messy, to show up with their flaws. I even think of like with this podcast, re-recording introductions and finally, you know what, it's fine. And just going with that. So really just, I think this one speaks to that perfectionism and that desire to please and want to be accepted. And really, you can't maintain that. You're human. So,
and again, I find people respond so well to that vulnerability. Again, the whole reason that Blissful Practice started was because I started sharing my experiences of how not pretty and how messy my first year of private practice was.
Yeah.
And people responded so strongly to that and wanted to hear more about my story and wanted to share their story and their kind of messy bits versus this very shiny kind of version of what other people were maybe putting out there. So I think the mess is where the magic happens.
Yeah. You need to put that on a Canva thing. or a blissful practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, good coping mechanism when all you see is mess.
Yeah. And I think, when you were describing the response that you had to blissful practice, it makes sense because everyone can identify with that. They identify more with the mess and the struggle than they do with the shiny practice or the shiny life.
Yeah, and I think similar in our personal lives as women, that can be a really scary thing to do, to maybe tell people what we're struggling with or sharing the not so great bits. But again, that's what fosters that connection.
Yeah.
And, I had mentioned that I have 8-year-old twins, and when they were babies, I met these other moms of twins, and we were just too darn tired to be fake about anything, so we would meet once a week with our twins and there'd be 5 women, 10 babies. Like, the gig was up. We were all messy, we were all tired.
Yeah.
That's what we needed.
Yeah. Allowing that experience into that space actually creates that space of support and connection, Yeah. Another habit on here is she described as the stillness or, hitting that pause button. And I think of, a lot of times I'm just caught up in my to-do list or what I need to do, what errands I need to run, what groceries need to be done, there's always stuff to do. And I think this is a good reminder that, there is so much value and there's gifts in stopping and slowing down, and that balance needs to be there so that the outward action is actually more meaningful when you do that.
Yeah. And again, I think, as a society, we have just become addicted to busy. When I ask someone, it's like, oh, how's it going? It's like, oh, I'm so busy. Like, A, busy is not a feeling. And B, like, why has this become the norm? And I'm not going to get too ranty, but then, we kind of do it to our kids by, kind of signing them up for a million activities and play dates and all these, so because we've lost our tolerance for being still, we kind of create this chaos as well. Yeah. So I think that idea of quote unquote doing nothing, sitting down and being still and just being in the present moment is both such a foreign concept to so many of us, but so incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think too that a lot of times, in addition to thinking that, we have to be busy, and forgetting that we're choosing the busyness, we're creating that busyness in our lives, that in order to be still or relaxed, that we have to be on vacation, not seeing how you can do that in every moment. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the stillness that you can find in the day-to-day is actually probably more meaningful than just going on vacation once a year, really making it a part of your daily life.
Something that we think about being still on vacation.
Yeah.
I was recently on vacation, and it was so interesting to look around and see people just on lounge chairs reading books or just like being there. And I was like, okay, so as human beings, we haven't completely forgot how to relax, but doing it once a week out of the year is probably not enough.
Yeah. I was actually talking to another colleague, and we were just commenting on how, our society really supports and kind of encourages and gives a lot of accolades to those who are really busy. And when you are struggling with something, for example, like at a job, they come up with an action plan for you, what you need to do. And so there's this sense of, if things aren't going right, I need to be doing something. And, we also talked about how that busyness is also sometimes just a way to deal with the anxiety and not connecting with the real feelings that are there.
Yeah. And I find even, in therapy, when clients, are asking for things to do, it's like, I need strategies, what should I be doing? Kind of, what should I be working on? Where what they actually need is to just slow down and connect.
Yeah.
So when I tell clients, I want you to, throughout your day, just connect to your own body and to your own experience. Like, look at me as this is again, like, why am I paying you to tell me this?
Oh my gosh, I can totally relate to that of, I don't know if this is helping because I really don't have any coping skills or coping strategies. And, when suggesting to them that I just really want you to, when you notice that you're feeling a certain way, to try to identify what you're feeling, where it is in your body, breathing, and just getting that look like, what are you talking about? But I think too that, when you do get still, yes, it creates that space for rejuvenation and creativity, but it also opens the space, I think, for the stuff that we also don't want to come up and pay attention to. So, it's, I can see why for some people it can be more difficult, but there are definitely gifts in letting yourself connect that deeper part of you.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely. I mean, I totally believe that a lot of our busyness is a way of, trying to avoid certain things, trying to, not feel the uncomfortable feelings, to not have that difficult conversation. So, I think every behavior that we do is usually driven by a really good reason for that behavior, even if it, can be harmful to us. So it's definitely not a judgment on people who are busy, because again, something is driving that behavior. And often it is because being still and just allowing ourselves to connect can be pretty scary and overwhelming.
Yeah. So the next one is turning envy into admiration and abundance. And I really like this one because I think it's something that all women can relate to, in that sense of maybe experiencing jealousy or, that comparing yourself to another woman, whether it's kind of mom she is, how she looks, what kind of business owner she is. And so I really like how, Glennon talked about insecure women will deal with their insecurity by tearing other women down. Wise women and stronger women will deal with their insecurity by raising women up. So it's not that wise or strong women are not insecure or they don't experience jealousy, but the way they cope with it is to look at the women that they admire, to notice that, to share those women's successes, to connect with them. And that's how they deal with maybe that feeling of jealousy or insecurity.
Yeah. And this is something personally for me, I've really been moving into and evolving to just kind of in the last year, because absolutely, I think we all get jealous. I think we all compare ourselves, again, if it's that we're not successful enough, in terms of private practice, we're not full enough like our, competitors.
Yeah.
And that idea of lifting other women up and reaching out, even to the individual women that you're kind of feeling envious of, is such a powerful thing to do, because it totally shifts the dynamic.
It does.
Because when you're sitting there home alone, kind of reading someone else's blog posts or seeing their pictures on Facebook, and it's just that envy is just kind of festering inside, that typically does not go well.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
Versus kind of reaching out to that person and saying, this was amazing what you did, and then it kind of, again, gets that connection piece going. And I've done this a few times, even just in the last few months. And sometimes it's been like, oh my gosh, I was like totally jealous of you. And, it becomes this common bond.
Yeah.
Or it opens up, again, that connection to be talking about, well, how did that person get to where she is? And, kind of what do you need to do? But again, I think you do have to have that core belief in abundance, that idea that there is enough for all of us, that your success does not take away from my success. It's it's two different things. It's not like you've taken, like how Glennon talks about, like, well, you've taken a slice of the pie and now there's less pie for me.
Right. So it's interesting how that, aspect of the envy or jealousy is really connected to that abundance mindset. And not just abundance in the sense of, financial, but even just that there's enough love, there's enough happiness, there's enough of everything. And one woman's success, one woman's experience is her experience. And it doesn't take away from you. It doesn't threaten you. And I've been also in the last 6 months, there's a woman that I admire, reaching out to her, connecting with her, letting her know, what I love about what she's doing. And there's a strengthening that comes from that. There's a feeling of confidence for me to move forward and take more risks. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think also as human beings, sometimes there can be that little bit of fear, like, oh, I don't want to be weird, and, like, hey, you're awesome.
Like do the fangirl thing, right?
Yeah. But again, as I'm, trying and experimenting things, I find that, like, for the most part, or never actually, no one responds badly to that.
No.
People might be a little bit like taken aback, but, people, like, I think, love being seen in a positive way. Like, we're all craving that. Yeah. So to have someone just, and again, it can be anything from complimenting, one of the schoolyard moms on their outfit, that she's really pro, and rather than kind of just like, being like, oh, why can't I be that put together?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I have a friend of mine who's just she's like a domestic goddess, and I am so not a domestic goddess. And I'm always telling her just, how in awe I am of the way she just does cooking, decor, all of it. It's so effortless for her. And I'm like wowed and just in awe, and she just laughs because she thinks I'm being too hard on myself, but actually recognizing that in her helps me to feel better about myself in those same areas.
Yeah, and I think also just accepting, it's like I often say, if I never had to cook another meal for the rest of my life, I would die a happy woman. Like, that is so not my strength.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that.
Yes. And I think, like, what you're just saying is when you are able to, support other women and recognize that their strengths, their successes are not taking away from you, you are also able to focus also on your gifts and what you add to the experience. So the last habit that Glennon listed was that it's really important for women to form an identity of their own, meaning it's not that you're a mom, that you're a wife, that you're a therapist, because all of those things it could change in some way. And so, who are you? If you're focused on your mom identity when your children get married or go off to college, what's going to happen? If things go south with your marriage and your identity is fused with being a wife, then what happens? And so I see this a lot with clients, and also with, with friends and family, where there is no other awareness that they bring so much more to their experience beyond the roles. I mean, they're very important roles, but, I guess being aware that they have something else to contribute that's just theirs. As Glennon described it, that's their soul.
Yeah. And again, I think it's so common for women to, describe themselves in terms of who they are in relation to other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And often I'll ask my clients, like, how would you describe yourself as a person? And often it's this, like, I don't know. Like, first of all, I think no one's ever asked that, like, ever.
Yeah.
It's often like, so what do you do? And how old are your kids? And how long have you been married? So again, I think society reinforces that idea that our value comes from, again, who we are to other people. And it's pretty rare to just be like, tell me about yourself, Lourdes.
Yeah.
Like, what are your dreams? Kind of what are some of your most meaningful experiences?
Yeah.
We're just not having those discussions.
No. I mean, if you even see this, on descriptors on different social media, I'm the wife of fill in the blank and the mother of fill in the blank, and even the status in a relationship or not in a relationship. These are the descriptors that society gives us to kind of, this is how I add value, is in this relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need new descriptors. It's like, I am awesome at this. I'm not so great at this.
Yeah, that would be a great challenge or exercise, is to have individuals describe themselves not in terms of their roles or relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, what one goal are you working towards right now? What was the last book that you read? So actually kind of getting to know our fellow women as people.
Yeah, and I think too that when you ask those questions, it also reminds you of the importance of honoring those parts of yourself, because I think a lot of times, the reason, people look at you when you ask them those types of questions, like, I don't know, what do you mean, is because they haven't paid attention to those aspects. Those are parts of themselves that they kind of left behind or forgotten. These are the things you would do maybe if you were by yourself on vacation, or if you had a full day to fill in any way you wanted, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that this is often, though, what drives people to therapy, at least for my clients, is because they have, really feel like they've lost or maybe never even had that sense of who they are. And, I would say most of my clients are probably, kind of mid 30s, early 40s. And, they're kind of in this phase of life where life isn't quite looking the way they had envisioned it to look.
Yeah.
They're not feeling the way they kind of thought they, quote unquote, should be feeling by then. And that lack of feeling really solid in their identity is really distressing. And then that kind of fuels that anxiety, fuels, again, that being busy all the time, fuels that comparison.
Yeah.
So I think this last point actually ties in really, really nicely to, all the previous ones we've touched on, is that maybe kind of, lack of awareness over who we are as people, as women, kind of makes us do all those other things. So maybe if we worked on this piece, some of the other things would fall into place.
Absolutely. And I would say that with my clients, the majority of my clients, the work is about their relationship with themselves. And it's sometimes a little surprising because they'll come in and it's about their marriage, or it's about their relationship with their adult children. And, I keep bringing them back to what's happening with you. Who are you apart from your roles? And I think what's also difficult with them is in this process of realizing that maybe they've forgotten parts of themselves, or maybe their life isn't really reflecting what they thought it would, and the ways that they have coping aren't working anymore, it can be really scary to think that, wow, I have to step back, rethink all of this. And I think it's difficult because tying into the busyness, there's nothing to do out here, but there's so much to do in here. And that's where they want the coping skills. They want to know, how do I make sure that, this evening I'm able to, get a date, or my husband and I can have a conversation about our vacation without getting into an argument. And it's frustrating when I encourage them to keep coming back to what's happening inside.
Yeah, it is easier to maybe focus on, again, on other people, and whether it's, that other people are causing the issue, or it's other people that are creating the stress.
Yeah.
And of course, that's going to play a role.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's like, what is the common thread in all of these situations? And the common thread is you.
Yeah. And the thing too is, I know for me that when I am connected to myself and when I'm in a good relationship with myself, regardless of what's happening out here, I may not be happy about it. It may be stressful, but I'm able to be in it and to deal with it and to be okay with it because my relationship with myself is okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense that, we are able to tolerate frustration. We're able to tolerate and cope with stress if, kind of fundamentally we're okay with us.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's not maybe necessarily pleasant, but when we're grounded and rooted in who we are, then it just makes those things so much more tolerable.
Yeah, I love how you describe that of being grounded and rooted in who you are. Yeah, I like that image. So, Agnes, we've talked about a lot of really amazing things today, these habits or qualities of strong, successful women. Are there any other suggestions that you have for women who are listening, who are wanting to move through life in a more meaningful way from more of a strengths-based place versus fear?
Again, I think that strengths-based part is so important because I think as therapists, but also as society, we often focus on, okay, what's not working? What's wrong? What can we fix? What can we change? Rather than kind of accepting where we are and who we are. And sometimes I describe it as uneasy acceptance, that there's some things that we don't like, we wouldn't have chosen it, it hasn't quite gone the way we were expecting it, but it is what it is, and fighting against it only creates more stress and more overwhelm. So again, and I think this part ties in with that stillness piece, kind of being able to just kind of get still with where we are and who we are can just be really freeing.
Yeah, I like how you called it uneasy acceptance. It doesn't mean you have to like it or it feels good, but you are not resisting or pushing against it anymore.
Yeah. And again, and then the counterintuitive thing is, the more we let go, the more we actually do allow ourselves to grow and change and shift. So that kind of trying to force things often works against us. And, I think that also ties into just as women, we can be really harsh on ourselves. We can be critical, from anything from, kind of, our cooking skills or what we look like in a bathing suit and how we're messing up our kids.
Agnes, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I feel like so many women are going to resonate with the things you shared and will be really meaningful and helpful in helping them move through life and to be able to be more accepting of themselves and to be more compassionate with themselves and others. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Lourdes. I love this discussion. We need to be having more of these discussions with like every woman we know.
Yes, we do. And I just want to add that you have really been, for me, a role model and inspiration, just have really helped me in so many ways that you don't even know. So thank you so much.
Aw, thank you. Well, I'm glad that we have connected and have been able to, be a part of each other's journeys. It's been lovely watching what you're doing as well. And then we have to give out a shout out to Glennon because
yes, we do.
Maybe one day she will listen to this podcast, and I know she's inspired me a lot, and more people need to hear her stuff. So
yes, thank you, Glennon Doyle Melton, for your wisdom and for inspiring this conversation today. All right, thanks, Agnes.
Thanks, Lourdes. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation with Agnes. I really feel like these 5 habits of strong, successful women, that they all connect and go back to the importance of a woman cultivating and nourishing her relationship with herself. And along with that, bringing in acceptance and As Agnes described, the acceptance may even be an uneasy acceptance, an uncomfortable acceptance, but bringing in the acceptance and the self-compassion. For show notes to today's episode and for links to the resources that were mentioned, please visit www.lourdesfiato.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.